Hey guys, this is part one of our introductory material into The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. I'm excited to experience this novel with y'all. It's one of my favorites, and I'm excited to really explore some of the deep meanings of the text. Today we're going to be focusing more on the structure of the novel and some background context on why he wrote it in the first place. And then tomorrow we'll be focusing on the preface of The Great Divorce, which C.S. Lewis wrote in the late 1940s. So first off, why did he write it? Was there a discussion going on? Why the Great Divorce to describe heaven and hell? So first thing we want to know is C.S. Lewis was interested in this idea of spiritual choices. We have a choice whether to follow Christ, we have a choice to not. And so what we have, this interesting idea is, if you choose to follow, you're in this realm of heaven. If you choose not to follow, you're in this realm of hell. So there was an interesting view called the refrigerium, spelled Refrigerium, refrigerium. And this was presented by a 17th century Anglican writer, Jeremy Taylor. And what he suggested, this idea that people in hell, or spirits in hell, have days off where they can actually visit other places. And so C.S. Lewis takes this idea. Now he makes it clear he doesn't necessarily believe in this idea, but he takes this as a way to explore this allegory. An allegory is a story where characters and symbols represent this overarching moral. And so he uses the refrigerium to kind of present this idea that heaven and hell can never coincide. What we see is he's combating this poem written by William Blake called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And what William Blake asserts is that what it means to be human is to have both evil and good in you, and therefore humanity is this marriage of heaven and hell. Now, C.S. Lewis did not like this idea. He believed that no, as a Christian you have this choice to follow, or as a person of not faith, you have this choice to not follow. Therefore, as opposed to a marriage of heaven and hell, there is a divorce, i.e., the Great Divorce. Now, one of C.S. Lewis's greatest influences was this man named George MacDonald. He attributes a lot of his writings, essays, and sermons to actually the conversion of C.S. Lewis himself. So he viewed him as almost a spiritual character. That's why we see him in the novel later on in the text. So, now we're going to talk about the structure of the Great Divorce. Where is it taking place? How is it heaven? Is it hell? Is it both? Why is this going on? So what you have to know is C.S. Lewis was a professor of medieval and Renaissance literature. What that means is he was very well versed in Milton's Paradise Lost, which is a similar narrative of this Garden of Eden and Satan. And so he's very influenced in that regard. He's also very well knowledgeable in this idea of Dante's Divine Comedy. As we talked earlier in the week, Dante's Divine Comedy is broken up into 3 books. It has Inferno, Purgatorio, or Purgatory, and then Paradiso, or Paradise. So we have hell, purgatory, and heaven as this progression. So Dante paints this character of going through hell and seeing the different realms of who fits where, and each level represents a sin of some sort. And then Dante goes from through Inferno and into this Purgatorio or Purgatorio, and this is a mountain. And so through the different levels, it mirrors this aspect of hell. Whereas if you were, for example, inflamed in lust, this fiery passion in hell, let's say you had accepted Christ as the Christian doctrine states, you wouldn't necessarily be in that level of hell, but rather you would have to spend a lot of times on this mountain circling through this fiery area, therefore inflamed with passion, i.e. lust, greed, carrying a thing up mountain, as opposed to in hell, you have no escape. And lastly, in Paradiso, once you climb this mountain, you have this Garden of Eden aspect. And in that regard, that's where heaven meets purgatory in this realm. And that's where you meet who Dante considered this divine being. It was a girl that he was in love with named Beatrice. What we also need to know is Dante had a guide. Dante's guide was an ancient writer named Virgil. To Dante, that was the pinnacle of writing. Virgil was this great philosopher writer, and therefore he chose him as his guide to understand the metaphysical. Likewise, Lewis chose the character George MacDonald. Like I said, was a great influence in C.S. Lewis's conversion to Christianity, so it would only make sense that George MacDonald was this person to explain the experience of the Great Divorce. Now, how does the Divine Comedy mirror the Great Divorce? Well, we have this experience in hell. Although it's not this idea of pain and suffering necessarily as defined in the Divine Comedy, but it's almost this absence of God. People are allowed to do what they want to do, but there's no sense of meaning in it. And quarrels separate each other. And we'll explore this later into chapter 1. But Lewis's character, it's a self-protagonist, it uses the first person, wakes up and there's a buzz. And he looks around and sees this desolate place. They don't call it hell, but it is this hell state. And then he goes into this other place, understood as heaven. And in that way, we see a mirror of the scenery of the top of purgatory, very similar to this outskirts of heaven in the Great Divorce. Is this coincidental? Probably not. What C.S. Lewis is trying to paint here is this structure similar to a journey of exploration seen in the Divine Comedy. Dante goes throughout to understand who the divine is. Likewise, C.S. Lewis is using that same structure to show there's a disconnect. And we'll see if there are characters who can truly accept heaven on their days off. What we'll see is that different characters will meet with counterparts, and there's a discussion, some of intellectual merit, some as emotional merit, some as familial, family merit. And the question is there this marriage of good and evil, or is it impossible for someone who has accepted evil to truly accept the goodness? So that's all we'll be talking about today. Tomorrow we'll be focusing more on the preface and get more of his views. So we'll see you tomorrow, and I look forward to talking more about the Great Divorce.